This is the Lex Beyond podcast by Lexicon Labs. I'm Lex.
And I'm Bianca. We've seen a pioneer of this industry literally get sent to federal prison because, well, the Department of Justice decided to dust off the Wire Act to shut down his offshore operation.
Right, that was Jay Cohen.
Exactly. And then, we saw the CEO of Europe's most promising prediction market meet just a truly tragic end.
Yeah, passing away right near the summit of Mount Everest.
And never even knowing he had just had a baby girl. Those were the first two chapters of this 4-part miniseries exploring the really wild, deeply human history of prediction markets and event contracts.
Been quite a journey so far.
It really has. But today, the battle comes home. We are pulling the timeline a lot closer to the present, and geographically, we're stepping right onto American soil.
Which is a massive shift in strategy, by the way.
Completely. We're talking fully registered, totally out in the open, and attempting what might be the most audacious legal loophole we've seen yet.
Because instead of operating from, the Caribbean or some server in Ireland, today's subject decided to just walk straight through the front door of the U.S. financial regulatory system.
Right. So welcome back. We are so glad you are here with us. Because today, our mission is to unpack the story of ErisX, or, as it's better known, ErisX.
Yeah, ErisX.
We are going to look at how a fully registered U.S. exchange tried to essentially backdoor sports betting right into the traditional financial markets.
And they did it by dressing it up as a corporate risk management tool, which is just fascinating.
It's brilliant marketing. But more importantly, we're going to see how that single attempt cracked open the regulatory fault lines. It exposed these massive, undeniable contradictions.
So to really grasp what ErisX tried to pull off, you have to look at the playbook they were using.
Okay, let's unpack this. What was the playbook?
Well, it's actually very similar to a company called Kalshi, who we will definitely be discussing a lot moving forward.
Oh, for sure.
So ErisX went through the grueling process of getting designated as a contract market, or a DCM.
And a DCM is basically just a federally licensed derivatives exchange, right?
Exactly. It's the golden ticket. And once they had that in hand, this was back in December 2020, they pushed through a self-certification for a brand new batch of event contracts.
And this is where I need to stop and look at the actual filing because, the products they certified sound exactly like a weekend in Vegas.
Oh, totally.
According to their documents, they were launching, and I quote, financially settled RSBIX NFL futures contracts.
Right, which sounds very technical and Wall Street.
Yeah, but just to translate the jargon for you listening, financially settled just means no one is delivering a physical ton of footballs at the end of the contract.
Yeah, you just get paid in cash.
Right. But the actual examples ErisX used in their filing are just wild. The terminology is identical to what you would see on a neon board in a casino.
They literally had a money line contract.
Yes. And their specific example was picking the outright winner of a game like taking the away team, the Jets, over the home team, the Bills.
And they also had a point spread contract, which, adjusts the final score by a margin.
So they used Jets plus 3.0?
Exactly. And finally, an over-under contract.
Which is just a payout based on the total combined points scored by both teams in that specific game.
So, anybody looking at that list is going to immediately conclude that these are sports bets.
Of course. You were wagering on the Jets to cover a 3-point spread.
Right. So for many observers, and regulators included, this was viewed as a blatant, thinly veiled attempt to wedge sports gambling onto a regulated commodities exchange.
But ErisX presented a completely different narrative, didn't they?
They did. They came to the regulators and explicitly argued, no, this isn't for a guy sitting on his couch betting on Sunday Night Football.
Right. They said, this is a vital risk management tool for the sportsbooks.
And that spin is honestly brilliant when you break down the mechanics of the sports betting industry.
Because of the whole home team bias thing?
Exactly. Consider the concept of home team bias.
Yeah.
State-regulated sportsbooks, they operate locally.
So if you run a sportsbook in New Jersey, your customer base is inherently biased toward the local teams.
Right. The fans are betting with their hearts, not necessarily their heads.
Okay, let me walk through the math on this to make sure I'm following, because I want to make sure you listening get this too.
Go for it.
If I'm running DraftKings in New Jersey and the Giants are in the playoffs, my local customers might dump, say, $10 million in bets on the Giants to win. Very realistic scenario. But only $2 million comes in on the opposing team. So my books are completely unbalanced.
Yep, you are heavily exposed.
If the Giants win, I am on the hook for a massive, catastrophic payout that could wipe out my entire quarterly revenue.
And that is the exact vulnerability ErisX was pointing to. A sportsbook has massive, unbalanced financial exposure.
So they argued these books needed a way to hedge.
Exactly. ErisX argued that sportsbooks needed financial instruments to manage that localized risk, the exact same way an airline buys oil futures to hedge against spikes in jet fuel prices.
Or a farmer using crop futures to hedge against a drought.
Precisely. ErisX was offering a way for that New Jersey sportsbook to go onto an exchange, buy an $8 million contract on the Giants winning, and completely neutralize their risk.
So if the Giants win, the sportsbook loses money to their customers, but the ErisX contract pays out and covers the difference.
It's a perfect hedge. They even pitched this for stadium owners and hot dog vendors, which I find hilarious.
Wait, really? Hot dog vendors?
Yeah, their argument was that if a home team has a terrible season, stadium attendance drops, right?
Right.
And fewer people buy concessions.
Oh, wow. So a vendor could buy a futures contract that pays out if the home team loses.
Exactly, effectively hedging against the lost revenue of a bad season.
The positioning was just pristine. It was framed purely as corporate risk mitigation.
But to prove they were serious about avoiding the gambling label, ErisX had to structure their market with a massive restriction.
Right, and this is the catch. They strictly prohibited retail traders from participating.
Yep. They locked the general public out of an open exchange.
They absolutely did.
They absolutely did. They limited the entire market strictly to eligible contract participants, or ECPs.
Which, in practical terms, means what?
It means you had to be a licensed sportsbook, a commercial vendor, or a designated market maker.
And didn't you also need a ton of money to even qualify?
Yeah, to even qualify as an ECP, an entity needed around $10 million in discretionary investments.
So speculators, day traders, and average retail investors were entirely walled off.
Completely locked out.
Okay, hold on. Let's unpack this. Because if you are setting up a market specifically for hedging, don't hedgers mathematically require speculators to take the other side of the trade?
They absolutely do.
I mean, if the New Jersey sportsbook wants to buy a contract that the Giants will win, someone has to be willing to sell them that contract.
Right. Otherwise, there's no trade.
So by locking out retail speculators, aren't they strangling their own market? It's like a casino opening a special high-stakes blackjack table to win back money from card counters, but then telling regular tourists they aren't allowed to sit down. Who takes the other side of the action?
That contradiction is the crucial flaw in their entire market design.
Yeah.
And it is exactly what triggered a massive regulatory collision that struck at the core of U.S. financial law.
Because ErisX's attempt to thread the needle created two major structural problems.
Right. Let's unpack the first one because it feels like an accidental grenade they just rolled into the room.
Oh, the swap grenade.
Yeah. By explicitly stating in their filing that event contracts on football games are technically commodities, ErisX inadvertently threw every state-regulated sports book in the country under the bus.
To understand the magnitude of this, you listening have to look at how the Commodity Exchange Act defines a commodity.
The legal definition is incredibly, almost absurdly broad.
Yeah, it includes any occurrence or contingency associated with an economic consequence.
Therefore, the outcome of a football game is legally recognized as a commodity.
Which means a bet on a football game is technically a commodities contract.
Precisely. And under federal law, commodity event contracts can legally only trade on a registered exchange at DCM.
Okay, so ErisX's filing highlighted a very uncomfortable reality for the government then.
Very uncomfortable. Because if a sports bet is a commodity contract, then state-regulated sportsbooks were arguably engaging in illegal off-exchange swaps, trading every single time they took a bet from a customer.
Wait, off-exchange swaps, just so I'm clear, are you saying that legally speaking, when a guy in Jersey puts $50 on the Giants through an app,
Yeah.
the government views that mechanism the exact same way as two megabanks trading interest rate swaps in a dark pool?
Conceptually, yes.
Yeah.
A swap is simply a contract where two parties agree to exchange cash flows based on the outcome of a specific event or metric.
Right.
If the event is legally a commodity and the transaction is happening off of a federally registered exchange, it is an illegal off-exchange swap.
Hold on, if that's true, why didn't the CFTC just raid the offices of DraftKings and FanDuel right then and there and shut the whole industry down?
Well, the CFTC found themselves staring at a jurisdictional nightmare.
I bet.
Shutting down state-sanctioned sports betting would mean going to war with powerful state legislatures, tax authorities, and a multi-billion-dollar industry.
An industry that had just won a Supreme Court battle.
Exactly. The agency either didn't fully realize the implication of ErisX's argument, or they actively chose not to touch that grenade.
So state betting was allowed to continue unaffected.
Right. But the second problem ErisX created was right in the CFTC's wheelhouse, and they could not ignore it.
Because the CFTC regulates DCMs. And a designated contract market has fundamental rules about who is allowed to participate.
Exactly. The commission flatly rejected ErisX's attempt to look like a pristine corporate tool by banning retail.
Dan Berkovitz, who was one of the CFTC commissioners at the time, issued a blistering, highly detailed statement tearing the whole structure apart.
He did. Berkovitz argued that an exchange simply cannot legally limit participation based on a user's net worth.
He pointed directly to the core principles, right?
Yes, which are the foundational laws governing how an exchange must operate.
Right.
Specifically, he cited Core Principle 2, which mandates impartial access. An exchange cannot impose discriminatory access criteria based on how rich someone is.
So by demanding participants have $10 million and ECP status, ErisX was in blatant violation of that principle.
Absolutely. And furthermore, he cited Core Principle 19, which deals with antitrust and anti-competitive behavior.
And this leads to the most fascinating insult of the entire saga.
Oh, the bucket shop comparison.
Yes. Berkovitz compared ErisX's setup to the illegal bucket shops of the early 20th century.
A great historical reference.
And for you listening, if you don't know what a bucket shop is, these were basically shady storefronts in the 1920s that looked like stock brokerages.
Right, they had the ticker tape and the chalkboards.
But they weren't actually executing your trades on the New York Stock Exchange. They were just taking the other side of your bet. They were acting as the house.
It is a devastating historical parallel. Berkovitz was pointing out that modern sportsbooks operate very much like those old bucket shops.
Because they internalize the risk?
Exactly. They internalize the risk, act as the house, and charge retail customers a premium for it.
Right. The VIG, or vigorish. Let me break down the VIG for a second because it really explains why Berkovitz was so furious.
Yeah, lay it out.
When you bet on a coin toss with a friend, you risk $10 to win $10. It's even money.
Sure.
But when you bet on a point spread at a sports book, the standard odds are usually minus 110, meaning you have to risk $110 just to win $100.
Right, and that extra $10 is the VIG.
It's the mathematical edge that guarantees the house makes a profit over time, regardless of who wins the game.
So now imagine what ErisX was proposing. They were creating a private VIP club just for the bookmakers.
Oh, man.
It would allow those bookmakers to trade tightly priced, highly efficient contracts among themselves on a regulated exchange.
They would get the absolute best prices.
The narrowest spreads and complete market transparency to hedge their risks perfectly.
While the regular person on the street.
While the retail customer is legally barred from accessing those fair exchange prices.
That is wild. The public is forced to go to those exact same bookmakers off exchange, pay the VIG, accept terrible odds, and deal with take-it-or-leave-it pricing.
Which is why Berkovitz argued it was profoundly anti-competitive to let bookmakers use a federal exchange to protect their own profit margins while legally prohibiting the public from getting a fair shake.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The irony here is just incredible. ErisX tried so desperately to appease the regulators.
Yeah, they thought if we keep the retail traders out, they won't accuse us of running a flashy casino.
But it was exactly that lockout, that very attempt to look like a pristine corporate risk tool that made them an illegal discriminatory exchange in the eyes of the CFTC.
They engineered a product that was a no-lose situation for the bookies and a no-win situation for the public.
And ErisX eventually saw the writing on the wall.
They realized the regulatory hammer was about to drop.
So they pulled the ripcord.
Yep. A single day before the CFTC's mandatory 90-day review period ended, ErisX withdrew their certification.
Day 89.
They voluntarily pulled the plug before the CFTC could formally stamp a rejection on it.
So because of that withdrawal, an official rejection order was never actually published.
Right. But we know exactly what that order would have looked like.
Yeah, the Wall Street Journal reported that the CFTC had been poised to reject ErisX's proposal on the grounds that it was contrary to the public interest.
The agency believed the proposed NFL futures could promote gambling and that ErisX hadn't adequately proven their ability to help firms hedge actual commercial risks.
But we also have the immense benefit of the public record here. While the order wasn't published, we have the detailed statements from two commissioners.
We discussed Dan Berkovitz, but the other was Brian Quintens.
And looking at the makeup of the commission, there are 5 spots, but one was vacant at the time. We can infer the vote was going to be 3-1 against ErisX.
And that lone dissenting vote was Brian Quintens. He was prepared to vote against the rejection.
And when ErisX withdrew, he issued a fiery statement outlining his dissent anyway. Quintens's dissent reflects a deep engagement with administrative law principles, even where its conclusions are contestable. We have Commissioner Brian Quintens's fiery dissent on one side and Commissioner Dan Berkowitz's statement on the other.
And we are focusing on two main questions here. What guidance did Congress actually give the regulators? And how you even measure something as vague as the public interest.
Right. So let us start with that first question, the guidance. Quintens argued vehemently that the CFTC had, absolutely zero legislative guidance.
Yeah, he essentially claimed that the statute is unconstitutional. Because in his view, it delegates this huge amount of power without any guiding principles at all, just leaving them to arbitrarily decide what gets approved.
But Berkowitz sees it completely differently.
Oh, absolutely.
No.
He points out that the Dodd-Frank Act itself is the guidance. There is this special rule in the Act that explicitly calls out contracts involving assassination, terrorism, war, and gaming.
Gaming. That is the key word here. And on top of that, there is this floor colloquy, like a formal exchange between two senators, that specifically called out sports event contracts.
Literally nothing else, just sports event contracts.
But Quintens gives that exchange zero weight.
Right, which is wild because think about the timing. Dodd-Frank was a massive reform passed right after the 2008 economic crisis.
Right, it was not some minor administrative update.
Exactly. So the idea that Congress, while trying to stabilize the global financial system, was suddenly agonizing over, casino roulette wheel spins is just highly implausible.
It makes no sense. If gaming doesn't mean sports event contracts, what could it possibly mean in that context?
Exactly. It just doesn't find support anywhere.
It makes me think of a club bouncer. Congress didn't tell the CFTC to just ban everything wholesale. Technically, contracts on terrorism or sports, they are allowed by default.
Right. They just gave them a list to watch out for.
Exactly. A specific VIP list of threats. Congress is basically saying, here is what you look out for. You are the bouncers. You have the market expertise you have honed since 1974, so you decide who gets in.
That is a great analogy.
And honestly, Quintens has this massive contradiction in his own argument here.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, he actually admits in his dissent that if an exchange tried to certify a terrorism contract, it would most certainly fail a public interest analysis.
Oh, I see.
Right. But if he truly believes there is no guidance from Congress, why would he expect it to fail?
Oh, that is a really good point.
That expectation alone proves that the enumerated list actually does trigger a valid expectation of review.
Okay, so if we accept that the CFTC is the bouncer looking at that warning list, they need a way to check IDs, right?
Exactly. Which brings us to the second core question.
Right. What specific tool is the CFTC supposed to use to measure those threats against the public interest?
Historically, that tool was the economic purpose test from the 1974 Commodity Exchange Act.
Right. The basic idea was a contract had to prove it was useful for actual businesses, like a farmer hedging wheat prices so they don't go bankrupt.
Beneficial risk management. Wheat, not chaff. Just betting on whether it will rain on a Tuesday is pure gambling.
Right. But the waters got muddied in 2000 with the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. It seemed to just take that specific test away.
Which is exactly why we are in this mess. Because Quintens, along with current CFTC Chair Michael Selig, argue that the economic purpose test is just dead.
Yeah. Under their view, the CFTC is not a merit regulator.
Right. They shouldn't judge the intrinsic societal worth of a product, just make sure the market for it is transparent. But Berkowitz argues Dodd-Frank revived that test.
Because U.S. capital markets need a way to distinguish beneficial risk management from pure gambling. If they can't do that, it undermines our lead in global markets.
And this is where I really want to push back on Quintens's logic. Because he is right that speculation isn't gambling.
He even brings up pandemic event contracts as an example, right?
Yes, exactly. He says pandemic event contracts could have legally helped restaurants hedge against lockdown risks. And he is totally right on that one. But then he simultaneously disavows the only tool the CFTC has to actually separate that beneficial speculation from pure gambling.
That is the ultimate deadlock right there. They both agree on the need to separate publicly beneficial contracts from the bad ones.
Yeah, but if we don't use the economic purpose test, what else do we have?
Well, ask Berkowitz, and his answer is the economic purpose test. Because really, what else do we have? Ask Quintens, and his answer is we have nothing. The statute is unconstitutional.
Wow. Well, we are going to leave you with this final thought to mull over.
In fact, we're going to leave you with a prediction Quintence made in his ErisX dissent.
He said, but the legal analysis and interpretations will remain secret until forced into the open by another, Boulder Exchange's decision to see a self-certification process through to a conclusion.
Wow. An exchange that will see a self-certification process through to a conclusion. Venture a guess.
Kalshi, of course.
Yes. And venture another guess. Hint, it's about Quintence.
He got involved with Kalshi?
Yes, he became his board member.
Oh, wow. That is quite the full circle moment.
It really is. Definitely something for you to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive.